Hello, friends, and welcome to Boston.com's Cocktail Club. I'm Jackson Cannon, and in a moment I'll be joined by Ted Kilpatrick, an excellent bartender and the owner bar director at Chickadee restaurant in Boston. Tonight we'll be making cocktails with Calvados, catching up about the state of the Boston bar and restaurant scene, and of course sharing with you tips the pros use to make great drinks at home. If you click through at registration to Gordon's Wine and Spirits and purchase the Calvados cocktail kit, well, you have almost everything you need. Profits from those kits go to Off Their Plate. This is a great charity. It's a dual purpose. Buys food from restaurants that need the business and distributes it to frontline workers and other people in need. We're very proud to partner with them. All right, so the typical kind of bartending equipment you'll need for tonight, you're going to need a cocktail shaker of some kind. I'm going to use Tin on Tin, this Craft House by Charles Jolie tonight. If you have a Boston mixing set with a glass and tin, you can do that. You're also, if you don't have that and you're trying to shake up a sour on the fly, a couple of home hacks you can use. You can use Tupperware, or I have a lot of these deli 2 cups. So I just can throw a cocktail in there, like when I'm on the road or something, can kind of shake that up, and it'll do in a pinch. You'll need something to measure with. We use these cocktail measuring tools we call jiggers in the bar room. They've got a bunch of different volumes kind of right at hand for when you're making drinks quickly in lots of different rounds. You get 2 ounces at the top down to a ½ ounce and lots of points in between. But if you don't have that handy at home, there's a tool you probably do have, a tablespoon, right? And so just remember, a tablespoon is ½ ounce. And most of these recipes are built off of a ½ ounce of something, or a full ounce, or an ounce and a half, or 2 ounces. And so it's very easy to divide it into tablespoons and measure great drinks out. It's a little slower than a jigger if you have a bunch of drinks to make, but in the home, you're often just making a couple of the same thing at a time. So it's very, very accurate and handy. You're going to need something to strain your cocktail out of your shaker with. I use a Hawthorne strainer, and a tea strainer can come in handy, but tonight I've got my Kilpatrick strainer. This is a really cool piece of equipment, and this combines both the Hawthorne and the tea strainer into one handy item. You need something to make juice. You can use this kind of a squeezer, which I'm going to do in a moment. A reamer will work, or if you have to, you can just cut juice and squeeze into a container by hand. Cut your fruit up to do that. We're going to be stirring a cocktail later with Ted, and I'm going to be using this really cool 1224 beautiful cocktail glass with a bar spoon. If you don't have those, you can use your shaker to do that, and that will work just fine. I've always got a cutting board, knife, and a peeler with me. I usually like to have a plate around. First drink doesn't call for garnish per se, but I'm going to do I'm going to show you a little side thing that you can do most times that you're making sours to make them a little bit fancier at home. For glassware, I got a rocks glass out. I'm probably going to go up in my coupe glass for the Jack Rose. And when we get to making that Corpse Survivor #1, I'm going to use this beautiful Nick and Nora. But again, if this is the glass you have, it works for everything. Ingredients, you'll need some Calvados. This is Daron Calvados that I'll be using tonight. Lemon, grenadine, Peychaud's bitters if you have it, and then some cognac and vermouth and a little cherry garnish to finish off our second drink. Well, that's about all the things that we need. So while you're getting that together, I'll tell you, I got to know Ted Kilpatrick years ago when he was behind the bar at Number 9 Park and I was at Eastern Standard. And as people in the business often do, we would visit each other on our nights off. He's worked many great places, including Radius, Celle de la Terre, and the aforementioned Number 9. He left us for 4 hard years down to New York City to open Oya NYC, Covina, and Rufus Park. Great places. He took awesome care of me there. Before returning to Boston, that's where he opened Chickadee with chef business partner John DeSilva. The place is terrific and it's open. Ted's a great bartender, a lover of Calvados, and a friend. Ted, it's great to see you, buddy. Welcome.
Jackson, it's great to see you. It's great to see anybody, but especially you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Yours is one of the few places I've braved to go to this past year. How's the staff doing? How are things going at the restaurant?
It's an ever-changing tide. We're getting new guidelines every few weeks, it feels like, and with that, the weather's changing. So it's quite a moving target. But everybody here at this point, I think we're a pretty galvanized team. We're those that are with us have been with us since we decided to reopen, and they're true believers, and they're their smiles on, and they just like to do what they come here to do, which is take care of our guests. And when they get to do that, it's all gravy.
And besides stopping by to stay for dinner with the reservation, which I highly recommend these days, if not always, what's another way that people can help out the bar and restaurant?
At the moment, and what we're realizing kind of post holidays is that our Fridays and Saturdays are really not too bad. It's really the midweek that we're kind of scary sometimes. So if there can be, even if it's takeout on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, it kills me when we have to turn people away on Fridays, Saturdays. I know that those are prime nights. It's not because we're jammed. It's because we're distanced and safe. So if maybe you pick up some takeout or come see us midweek, if you're comfortable doing so. Right.
Well, you're doing cocktails to go, right?
Sure are.
Hashtag cocktails for Commonwealth. You gotta love that.
You were a godsend there, Jackson, getting that push through.
Everybody does their part, to get something like that. We got to keep it now. I'm hoping people are getting used to that, but it's a great thing to do. I can't stress it enough, friends. You should definitely call in, stop by there, get something to go early in the week. Maybe even one of your new favorite cocktails when you don't feel like making it yourself. I'm getting thirsty, Ted. I don't know about you.
As well, let's do this.
So I'm probably going to go a little slow. I waited to do my lemon juice. We're going to make the Jack Rose cocktail. And one thing I just wanted to talk about with everybody, I always forget to mention ice is an ingredient. It's just so important. One other thing that's important that we do in the bars and restaurants that sometimes you don't think about at home is chilling your glass, right? So I'm just going to throw an ice cube up into my coupe glass before I get started with everything. And, if you're at home and you think of it, you can leave them in the freezer for a little while. But it's always good. It's, we find that the cocktail served in that chilled glass, maybe the first sip is the same, but the last sip is just a little bit nicer, right? So I'm going to prep a little lemon juice. And before I do that, I'm going to cut a twist off. This is not something you need to do for every sour cocktail that you make, but I'm going to show you how sometimes it can kind of brighten things up a little bit. Before you make your juice, just save your twist for a little bit later here. Ted, I'm imagining you guys are still making juice by the quart before the shift starts, right?
We juice every day for sure, but sometimes it's a pint, sometimes it's a quart or a little bit less. But yeah, always fresh. And the kitchen's great about using anything that is past its prime.
It was a strange feeling, but I always felt a certain kind of victory when I had to juice just like for the last couple of cocktails every night. And I know that about you. I know you like to be kind of right on.
Same.
That sort of thing.
100%. Yeah, that's a victory if you're pulling out the old hand press for the last one or two of the evening.
All righty. So to build our Jack Rose, we're going to start kind of more or less with a couple of the smaller ingredients first. This is a grenadine I make. I don't know about your recipe, Ed. I put one out for everybody if they had a chance to make kind of a 2-to-1 pomegranate grenadine with a little orange blossom water. Pretty common recipes. Have been with us 100 years or so, And on this, I'm doing 3/4 of an ounce of that, and then I'm going to use 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice just to kind of clean out my measuring jigger. And now the star of the show, a couple ounces of Daron's Calvados. Ted, lots of good questions coming in from our friends, Ted, about Calvados.
Oh, great.
Just, we can do a little bullet round. We'll get to all those after we get a drink. And then if you have any of this stuff around, this is Peychaud's Bitters from New Orleans. The pink stuff, we sometimes say. I tell people I like to put it on my cereal. I'm going to put a drop in. Now, if you're making this cocktail for the first time, or you're making 2 of them side by side, maybe try it in one, see if that's your personal preference. Not everybody likes a little bit of bitters in there, but I think it kind of pulls the flavors together. Very, very light on that. And now, the one ingredient all good cocktails have in common, A little cold water. We have ice. We have ignition. Show them your shaker face, Ted. Oh, yeah. Ted, I'm love using this strainer, and people are already asking me to have you tell us a little bit more about how this came about. But see that I get a tea strain right out of my Hawthorne Kilpatrick style strainer.
Good choice.
And then this drink has everything we're looking for in it. You know, the reason we shake these drinks with citrus is we want to get all the ingredients together, chilled, add some water, add a little air by banging the ground in there. And you can kind of see from the top, you can see really clearly in the shot of Ted's drink from the side there. He's got this little bubbly crema forming on top, right? And we sometimes call that the wash line or the signs of life. I think it was Embry who said you should still drink your drink while it's laughing at you, because you can, those little bubbles of air kind of popping through are a sign that it's just like well constructed and going to be a delightful sour. And then we're just going to do a little twist of lemon over the top because we were making lemon juice. We saved our peel. And now you got a bright, vibrant, delicious, wonderful Jack Rose made with Calvados. Cheers, Ted.
Excellent. Cheers.
Good to have a drink with you.
Yes. It's been too long since I've had a Jack Rose, too.
Right. So a lot of the questions in the chat are sort of asking about the difference between Applejack and Calvados. I don't think we want to get too far down the rabbit hole of history, but just the basics. Applejack's an American apple brandy that can have some grain spirit mixed into it. Calvados is a delineated French apple brandy that can't. But do you have any cocktails, Ted, that you find one works better for the other, or particularly ones you like to use Calvados in?
Well, I find that like most products, that there's a French version and an American version. A French version is going to have a little bit more nuance. So I think if you have a lot of stuff going on, I think Calvados is beautiful in this cocktail, but you know, I might prefer it in something that's a little bit more of a contemplative, stirred sipper. Not to get people psyched for the drink that I'm going to make after this, but just broadly speak, there's layers to it. The French and Europeans in general, they take more time to do things than we Americans do. And as a result, there's a little bit more soul in it, I think. Not that I love Applejack. I think it's beautiful. It's a little bit more fiery, a little bit more truncated, but I think try it with both. I don't think one's better than the other. I just think that maybe, you know, Calvados has layers that I'd like to get to know a little bit more intimately.
The you know, before the cocktail scene in Paris and in France in general exploded and kind of joined the modern movement, people used to joke that the French cocktails were so bad because their starting ingredients were already so good, which I thought was a funny, you know, thing that was true at the time. I don't think it's really like a lot of funny statements like that true to the core. The other thing about the Calvados and the Jack Rose, when I finally like landed on my narrative justification, I was doing it just because I thought it was delicious. But you know, this whole thing about how I connected with the Jack Rose in literature and Hemingway and The Sun Also Rises. Well, Jake Barnes is an American expatriate having Jack Rose cocktail. I imagine in Paris Cafe, this is the one he was having. You know, so for me, it makes that a fun, interesting choice. We're getting a couple of questions on the chat that I wanted to step in on. Could you use Angostura bitters instead of Peychaud? Try it and see. I've done it. Again, if you're going very, very slight, you'll get the effect of bitters. You won't quite push the apple flavor and the pomegranate and the juiciness the way Peychaud's does. But that little addition of cinnamon could be a welcome thing, sort of a fall version, if you will, or more of a winter flavor, I think. And then how much water did we add to the Calvados? We didn't have water. We had frozen water, ice. I was trying to be cute, not trying to confuse anyone. But I always go back to Harrison Ford saying ice equals civilization. We really don't have the modern cocktail the way we think of it without it. So it wasn't water per se. But Ted, you've studied this a little bit. How much water do you think ended up in this cocktail while we were shaking?
Hopefully about 20% of the total volume, ballpark. So if we're talking, it's a 3.5 ounce build. Hopefully it's maybe an ounce and change, ounce and a half. It'll vary depending on the state of your ice a little bit. Less water obviously means it's a little sharper. The citruses are a little bit louder. The booze is a little bit more present, whereas a little bit over diluted and maybe everything's just a little bit kind of fuzzy and blended together more than it needs to be.
So I've got a question that somebody sent us, but I think it's a better question for me to ask you because you know how much I love this cocktail and have been waiting for it to sweep the nation. The question is, do you think that the Jack Rose could ever gain back anything close to its popularity? I don't even know if it ever was all that popular, but what do you think? What do you think the chances are that this?
I mean, I think that Jackson, you're probably responsible for this a little bit, but there's a ton of cocktail bartenders out there who, when asked for pomegranate martini, they make them a version of a Jack Rose, and then they get to tell the story of the Jack Rose, and all of a sudden, hopefully, they're drinking a Jack Rose. So it could make its way back there, and I say again, I don't think that has a little to do with you and your bartender offspring.
Yeah, no, there's that move to call it a red apple martini. I think that that we're getting to a point where that doesn't quite comfort people the way it did before they learned as much as they seem to know now about cocktails. They're interested in the different names of things, but for a while there, right? If you just said you just put teeny after it, they give it a try, So
Sure.
Should we see how this spirit swirls up?
Shall we?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe one more sip. All right. So I'm going to be making a drink called the Corpse Reviver #1, and it's a drink that I probably deep dive a little bit more into what I deem to be the impropriety of Harry Craddock, who actually kind of gave it its official name, who wrote the Savoy. He was the head bartender at the Savoy in London, and he wrote the Savoy cocktail book. It's just a tome of basically every drink you could possibly imagine, at the time anyway. And he was the first to put in print the Corpse Reviver #1, the Corpse Reviver #2. If I'm not wrong, the #3 was also in that book. I think
I believe so. Yeah.
Menthe and Fernet and to be honest,
Cognac,
the outline cognac and the outlier of the 3 in print is the only one that really gained any popularity, and that's the #2. The #2 really is #1, as it turned out, and it's because it's a little more approachable. It's a little bit kind of more fun and flirty, and it's a gin sour. It's nice and floral from some Quina Lillet, and laced with a little bit of absinthe, which gives it like this little kind of frosting finish, like a little frosty, cooling menthol in the swallow. It's no wonder that it gained popularity. It's a pretty simple gin sour. The Corpse Reviver #1, what a departure from the Corpse Reviver #2. I don't know how you started with this for #1 and then you move on to that for #2. It makes no sense to me. Never has. I did a little piece for Boston.com about that disparity of the different types of corpse revivers, and I think that it was almost inappropriate for Harry Craddock to try to call it of its own little family of drinks. There's nothing that makes something a corpse reviver versus not. I kind of theorized that it was just anything that didn't fit into a certain template at the time. Like if it wasn't a sour, if it wasn't a daisy or a fizz or a flip, they just called it a corpse reviver because they didn't know what else to do with it. And they were the first kind of like beta cocktails, the first drinks that had no template, that didn't make any sense, that just had a bunch of stuff in it. And they were for maybe the drinker that likes something a little bit more austere. Corpse Reviver #1, however, I think in the chillier weather we're having right now, is a perfect drink to call for and to reach for. It's got a wine-like complexity. It's a 3-part drink. It has what's the beauty of a 3-part drink is we're going to make today's in equal parts, and you should get to know it. And if you think that the Calvados needs to be a little bit louder and you need a little bit more apple involved, then that's a direction you can go. If you think that it needs to be a little bit more cognac forward, then that's a direction you can go. You really, with like this tripod of a 3-part drink, you can really have like many, many more than just one type of drink. You'd have 3, 4, 5, 6, any number of them. And I've made this drink a number of different ways.
It reminds me a little bit of the Negroni that way, in that it's so durable that it really bears up to those pushes and pulls from one side to the other. And people
Yeah.
always ask for your dogma on something like that, and it's like coffee as you like it, not as I do. Like so.
Right.
I'm a slave to the equal portions here because I really feel like it's a 2-to-1 with a split base,
Mhm.
and that just seems to work so well to my palate and sensibility. But I could see dropping a little more cognac in there if that's your jam, or lead with the Calvados even.
Depending on the day. Maybe one is a Tuesday libation and the other is a Thursday libation. But for
Outstanding.
today, we're going to do equal parts. So for this one, Jackson spoke to it earlier, and he has it in front of him. We have our mixing pitcher. You can use really anything for this. This is a much easier drink if you don't have the proper tools at home. If you have a vessel that can hold liquid and ice, and something that can agitate it, stir it gently, and then something that can keep that ice from getting in your cocktail, you're making drinks. Perfect. So we're going equal parts, and we're going to lead with vermouth. I'm using Carpano Antica Formula Vermouth, a little bit more robust vermouth. And Jackson, I see you have another one of my favorites.
The Juice Bomb, the Cinzano. We like them all, though. People were asking our favorites. It's hard to choose, like.
Yeah, they're for different
like
purposes, or they're for different purposes on different days.
Yeah.
I apologize. I'm very tethered today, and I'm really nervous. I'm going to knock a lot of things over because of it. I feel like I'm in the Matrix.
You're looking great, buddy. People
Nice
asking if you can sub dry vermouth on the chat. And that's a bold move. The way I look at sweet and dry vermouth is not as polar opposites, as subtle shifts really in the same spectrum. They're both based off of this sweet wine with botanicals, So you could probably try that, or you could probably try splitting it too. I've done it before. I think I prefer it with the Italian style vermouth, But
Sure.
Have you ever tried it with the dry?
I've not tried it exclusively with the dry. No, that not to say that it wouldn't work, but I don't. My gut says it wouldn't work as well as an Italian or sweet vermouth.
I may call you back when we go off the air at 7:30 and give it a try.
Let's do it. I'm game. Next up, an ounce of our cognac. I'm using Pierre Ferrand 1840, as I have it on hand. 1 full ounce of that. One ounce of the Calvados. And also, as far as tools go, I know Jackson is forever an over-under jigger person. I use these little OXO measuring buckets, as they're called. I think that perhaps if you might be more comfortable with it as a home bartender, it harkens a lot more to a measuring cup than it does having to get to know the over and unders of the jiggers. Just a possible recommendation. I love the over unders also, but maybe you didn't know they existed in that form. Now that we're fully built, I'm going to add some ice to my mixing pitcher.
So a friend is asking on the chat of us, can I put the ingredients in any order? I'm saying yes, of course.
Yeah. I personally, just because we're trying to stay afloat around here, I use the less expensive ingredients first, just so that if I overpour after that and I have to throw the cocktail away, I'm throwing less money away. That's an aside that you needn't worry about in your kitchen.
I also tend to go from, heavier to lighter sometimes. If I'm, for me, it's kind of like it sort of cleans out the jigger. If you get to the end and you've poured some Calvados in there, you might, you're still going to give it a rinse, but you might be able to throw a jigger of whiskey on that into another cocktail and you really wouldn't notice. So
I wouldn't tell.
Oh, I love the way Ted is stirring, friends. You see that? Like that, he's moving that around, but the ice isn't jumping around. So this is something it's a little harder than it looks. We get the hang of it. I think it's a kind of essential life skill, like sewing a button or searing a steak. You just want to move the spirit around in the glass. It's sort of the opposite of what we did before, because instead of adding a bunch of air into the cocktail, we want to create the sinewy texture of all the ingredients being woven together.
I think of it sometimes as just treating it like wine. Like if I'm making something that's as kind of silken and layered and textural and beautiful as a nice sip of wine, you're not going to shake up that bottle of wine before you pour it. You want it to be relaxed. All right.
And you
We're
can see,
nearing
you
there.
can sort of see that moment where the ice relaxed kind of in both of our shakers at the same time and kind of dropped down a little bit.
I've got to detach and get the glass. If you're not, I'll be back.
So I put a little ice cube in mine. He's grabbing his out of the freezer. And you're going to be able to see in Ted's shot, this our friend Joaquin so beloved this process that happens when you've stirred a drink to perfection that it pours out of your shaker like it's pouring a ribbon. And I think you've got a really good angle on Ted's glass to see just the swirl of liquid carefully downward into the glass. It looks beautiful, Ted. That's such a kind of little catchphrase that you know, the tenders sort of use it with each other. They say, how was your night? Nothing but pouring ribbons, you know? So nothing could be better than a night of stirring a bunch of silky drinks.
Then I have to finish the most beautifully skewered maraschino cherry.
So that's nice with the skewer. You can kind of like choose when you want to do that. I dropped mine in mine. It's going to force me to get to the bottom till I get to that last part. Ed, what pleasure making drinks with you. Cheers.
As well. Almost old times. Better than I remember it.
Right? That's complex. You know, clearly people interested in this drink, they're starting to have a few questions, and we have time for a few. They're thinking, is this drink related to, say, like a Saratoga, or what did they just ask me? Saratoga or a Vieux Carré. It's like, I guess, more similar in proportions to a Vieux Carré, but very different character.
And I think, as my understanding, historically, I don't think they would have had too much commingling, other than maybe inspiration from afar. Just as far as Saratoga, as far as we know, is coming from the Northeast, the Vieux Carré from New Orleans, and this guy from, if I'm not wrong, France originally.
It's also prompting. It's also prompting some questions, definitely from France. But you know, it makes you wonder. They knew how to make a Manhattan in France, you know, and so people are asking, hey, this sort of seems like a bourbon cocktail or whiskey cocktail to me. And to that, I would say, yeah, you know, like if the Corpse Reviver as a name is failing as a family, this probably belongs closer to a Manhattan in terms of family than any other drink on the board, you know. So
I would agree. And that's the beauty, is that all we can do is surmise. All we can do is guess as to what recent article that the creator of this in 1926 had read that made him say, I bet that would be good with my local product of Calvados.
Right. Well, and it doesn't have to be that, or it could just be the journey of discovery is going to lead you to 2 parts spirit to 1 part vermouth, because the inherent sort of culinary architecture in there is just, it's waiting for you to find it, you know.
All roads lead to balance.
Oh.
So one last thing I would say, and it might be redundant to other shows, just the one advice that I always try to give to any home bartender who's asking how they can make better drinks at home is to treat their ice like an ingredient to the cocktail. And it shouldn't just be the ice that sits next to, the frozen pea soup and mangoes from Trader Joe's. If you have the space, put your ice somewhere separate, wrap it up, put it in its own cooler. If you can buy cocktail ice before you're going to have folks over for cocktails, that's even better. But ice just takes on all the aromas and the flavors of the things around it, even when frozen. So you treat your ice like you treat your fruit and your produce and your spirits and all those things. It makes drinks
great advice.
20% better immediately.
Hey, have you ever made any hot drinks with Calvados?
I think I've done like a fancy stone fence in the past. I think that's when we did it number 9 for a little while. So it's just some hot cider and Calvados.
Warm cider Calvados and a little lemon clove maybe.
Works well, yeah. Originally, I see what is a stone fence. Originally, that would have been another Applejack one, where if you make it with Calvados, maybe it's just a little bit more, how you say, French.
It's French to me. So people are asking if they should use store-bought grenadine or make their own. You know, for me, this is awesome that you're broadcasting from the bar.
I sure
That was,
am.
to me, that was an advertisement to get on toast and
Yeah,
order up
there are people
something
here.
to go. Yeah, come on down. I think it's better to take the time to make your own 2 parts pomegranate juice to 1 part sugar grenadine with a little blossom water if you have it to finish it off. But I've used the store-bought stuff. It's just you got to check if it's a little thinner or a little sweeter. You got to just be ready to apply your different, you know, to tweak it a little bit with your other ingredients.
Agreed. It sweetens the drink, but it's a very different product.
Have you ever made like a cranberry grenadine?
Well, I've made cranberry syrups before when it's in season. So I guess you could say, you know, grenadine grenade is French for pomegranate. So grenadine inherently is just a pomegranate base. So it's just a pomegranate syrup. That's all grenadine is. So I've made cranberry syrups before.
You know, it's funny. If you go far enough back in some of the texts, you'll see a recipe that says like lemon or lime because it wasn't a time of on-demand lemons and limes. And I sort of feel like the great syrups were pomegranate in the winter and raspberry in the summer. But that's not, you know, that's not to say it wasn't strawberry or cranberry or any of the other kind of fruits that you might use. And all of the drinks that have grenadine in that place, it's a really interesting point of departure and a great way to do seasonal bartending at home. I actually have from some blueberries that I froze last summer, I made a little cardamom blueberry syrup that's kicking around in the fridge. It's just, you know, one more way to make a fancy Collins in the dead of winter. So
yeah, wasn't the original recipe for the Jack Rose with raspberry like way back?
You know, original, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if that was proved, but it definitely is a cocktail that comes from the time that you would have had one in the winter and the other in the summer. It's hard to imagine you'd have had pomegranates in July in the Northeast at the turn of the last century. So,
sure.
Well, hey, that's about all the time we have. I just want to say that's Cocktail Club for this week. Thanks so much for joining us, Ted. Thank you for being here, everybody else. Please join us every Thursday at 7. Next week's guest is Will Azaza, and we'll be mixing a couple of classic rum drinks. Make sure to follow the link from our sign-up page to the Gordon's Wine and Spirits link to pick up your rum cocktail kit. You'll be supporting Off Their Plate and getting everything you need for next week's Boston.com Cocktail Club. Thanks, Ted. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Jackson. Good to see you.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.